And hello, everyone, and welcome to Connections Live, which is our webinar series designed to help you deepen your sense of interconnection, to inform, and to inspire. And as mentioned, we are delighted to have special guest Dr. Julia Mossbridge with us here today, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. And as we are settling in here, I just want to invite everyone to take a nice deep breath in and a full exhale out, just arriving as if we were all arriving in the same room together. So, wherever you've come from, just taking a few deep breaths to presence here together. And also invite you to just contemplate what called you here today or what your intention is for the webinar. We are recording this webinar, and then the recording will be available on our website at the link until noon next Friday. And then with all of our Connections Live webinar recordings, it will then be available to IONS members on the Media for Members section of our website. Okay, so I think we are ready to dive into our program today, and we are so happy to have Dr. Julia Mossbridge. Many of you may know of Julia from her work with IONS or other places, and I do want to just read a short bio for those of you who are not familiar with her. So Dr. Mossbridge is after a deep understanding of love, time, and how these two human experiences relate to corresponding physical forces. She's an affiliate professor at the Department of Biophysics and Physics at the University of San Diego, a fellow here at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, the co-founder of TILT, the Institute for Love and Time, the founder of Mossbridge Institute, and an author and co-author of multiple books on scientific articles related to time travel, artificial intelligence, and unconditional love. Her PhD is in communication sciences and disorders from Northwestern University, and her master's in neuroscience from UC San Francisco. And she was awarded a BA in neuroscience with highest honors from Oberlin College. So that's a bit about Julia, and just warm welcome, Julia. It's been a while since you've been on our webinar, so we are so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Andrea. It's so great to see you. I was looking at some of the chat and where everyone is coming from, both sort of metaphorically and physically, and it's exciting. I'm glad to be here. Let's get going. Let's have a really cool discussion.
Excellent, excellent. So yeah, today we are talking about time travel and unconditional love. And these are not two things that you usually hear in the same sentence. So I would love for you just to orient us and start telling us about these two areas that you study and how they relate to each other.
I'm still exploring how they relate to each other for sure, but I'll answer I'll answer from what I know so far and what I suspect. What I know so far is that let's just take time travel first. So I talk about three different kinds of time travel. So let's take the one that appears in science fiction, physical time travel, where you take your entire who you are as a person and all of your memories usually, and you go somewhere else in time and you have an experience and you're able to function and record that experience and then move elsewhere in time. So this is like a Doctor Who version of time travel. So physical time travel, people have been after, of course, because why have they been after it? There's two things that go on. One is you have an experience that would be really cool, right? To look at the future or observe the dinosaurs or whatever it is. So they're after experience, and they're also after information transfer. So what if you could go back to the fall of 2019 and tell us, do you have all your pandemic stuff together? Because maybe we should consider how we might handle a pandemic right about now, right? And so those are the kind of pieces that people want to do. So let's back off of physical time travel, because right now, to do something like that, you would need, it seems like you would need a wormhole or some kind of exotic situation like that, and then we're not even sure if you could take your consciousness or your memory or even something as large as a human in that. Let's back off. Let's go to informational time travel. Informational time travel is literally the capacity to provide a message um, backwards or forwards in time. So we do it forwards in time using the printing press, right? We're going to write a book, and even though the people now may not understand it, and several generations ahead, they might understand it. So we already do that kind of informational time travel. Backwards in time informational time travel is the kind where you would send a message, not a person, but a message back to fall of 2019 and say, seriously, get your pandemic stuff together, right? So that's kind of, people are working on that. I could say more about that, but that's sort of another way to think about time travel. And then experiential time travel, which is the other piece that people want from time travel, is when you can put yourself in a place where you trust that your experience is somehow in touch. You don't worry about the details, but is somehow in touch with information at different points in time. So this is what I think is very healing. And I'm not the only one who thinks it. So there's actually, research not done by me showing that you can be in a therapeutic situation with someone and help them get over trauma or help them forgive themselves, which is also part of getting over trauma. And also then learn to connect with their future self, a version of an internal representation of their future self that can support them. And you don't have to prove that any of that is actually happening, as we like to think of in the material world, actually happening. Don't worry about that. You just see that it's valuable for people and you frame it as a time travel exercise and you go forward from there. So those are the three kinds of time travel. Now, what I've noticed, or at least the ones that I talk about, what I've noticed is that when I train people in that first, I thought we talked about it last, but the most basic experiential type of time travel that's most approachable right now for most people, um, they get easily into this state of unconditional love. Okay, so let's go to the state of unconditional love and talk about what that is. So when I study unconditional love in a scholarly sense, I created a validated scale. I think it's the first of its kind. I don't see any other unconditional love scales out there, but a validated scale that measures to what extent you're experiencing unconditional love. And from the wording of the scale, I borrowed a lot from Adam Crabtree, and he's a hypnotherapist who wrote a wonderful book called Revolutionary Love and the Ravages of Greed. And I talked to Jim and Christina Grody, and they got their input, and also Eddie Monroe on the Loving AI team when we were working with Sophia and having her meditate with people to help them feel unconditional love. So it's a wordy definition, and it's a sort of a scholarly definition, and I don't like talking about it in these kind of contexts because it's easier to understand and boil down to its essence, which is loving all that is without the need for anything to change. So loving all that is without the need for anything to change. It's not just acceptance. It's not unconditional acceptance. It's actually actively loving all that is without the need for change. So you can see how that tool is super important to the invention and dissemination of time travel. So if we're in a psychological state as a culture, a cultural state, let's say, of wanting to always change things, like this didn't go well, we're going to change that, da 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 da, willy-nilly, we're going to do a lot of stupid things with time travel, informational time travel, which is the next thing to sort of come out, right? We're going to, if we're not into loving things as they are, we're going to make stupid mistakes, and that will be a problem. And so you need, if I grew up in the Cold War era, and I just noticed the way that nuclear weapons, this is an obvious statement, but the way that nuclear weapons were sort of created and then sort of unleashed on the world as things that we can use, but we shouldn't, that's not a good way to handle the dissemination of technology. So it seems to me what's needed for going down this time travel route, which I think we are, is this unconditional love route. They have to go hand in hand. So, and I've noticed that when people get into this state of unconditional love, when they get into that state, they are also more able to access information about the future. So that's a different set of studies we can talk about. So these are the kind of connections I've seen so far, but I have a deep intuition that there's a very technical relationship here that I don't totally have figured out. So
I love that. So it's almost like the unconditional love piece you see as a prerequisite in some ways to going deeper into the time travel. Is that right?
well, it should be a prerequisite. And I think it's sort of like a lock and a key. I think the way the universe is created is you actually, if you have that key, you're able to turn the lock of getting this extra information in informational time travel. And if you practice getting the extra information and connecting with yourself over time, it allows you to get the key that then opens the lock. So it's this loop. Someone said they were interested in loops. Me too. I think it's the sort of the substrate of reality are these loops. So it's this co-creative loop that isn't a temporal one.
Amazing. And these are such big concepts and experiences, both the informational time travel and the unconditional love. Um, I would love for you to talk about how you practice this. Like, how does one begin on a journey to practice unconditional love? And then I'd love to get into your research after that. But what's the practical steps towards that?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of unlearning of what we believe love is. So if unconditional love is loving everything that is without the need for anything to change, there's an immediate, no, I'm not going to do that, that comes up because there are horrible people in the world, right? I mean, by horrible people, I don't mean that the essence of their soul is horrible. What I mean is their behaviors are really dastardly, are really tragic. It's really hard and terrifying, right? So you say, well, I'm going to love everything that is without a need to change, but within reason. I'm not going to love a pedophile, right? And so that's because we believe, I think that that's because we believe that the way it works is if you love something, it's like saying that it's correct. It's like saying that that's the right way to be. But that's not the way love works. It's almost like, well, it's exactly like, it's like an infant. You don't say the baby's crying, so I'm going to withhold my love, right? And this wonderful mystic whose name is escaping me said, from the infant, the sword is removed. I consider every nation an infant. In other words, we have that level of innocence, all of us. And so what helps is removing the sword. You can do that in a loving way, right? It, there's, and yet it sounds like a paradox because I'm saying something needs to change, but things are changing all the time. So when it says without anything needing to change, you're also not changing the reality that you might have a motivation to do something different than you're doing right now. Like that's also something that doesn't need to change. So it's sort of it's this deep mystical insight that I'm 100% not the first person to have, but I think is really powerful, which is that this reality is unfolding in this way, and there's no risk to loving that reality as it's unfolding with all its good parts and its bad parts. There's no risk to that. In fact, it's super valuable. So the experience of loving that reality doesn't make that reality more horrible or better. It doesn't change the reality at all. It's just that you're loving it. And there's something mechanically powerful about that in your relationship with the universe that I don't understand.
Yeah,
Okay, so
that's
sorry, let's get
really
practical.
powerful. Yeah. That's really powerful that there's no risks to loving the universe as it is. I think I just want to highlight that. That's
There's
really beautiful.
no risk.
Painted in one way. It's yeah.
There's no risk. And so I'm sorry you asked a practical question and I got really like abstract, but let me answer the practical thing. So the first step is unlearning this sort of puritanical worldview that says like people should be punished for their behavior as if they're not part of the unfolding universe. So that's a big deal. That like basically challenges our entire judicial system and everything else, right? So that's a piece. sort of meditating on that, I think, would be a good idea. And then just asking. So I know that we do a lot of at IONS and stuff we do, and you do are really good with intention. But intention is sort of like saying something has to often can be seen as something has to change, and this is the thing I want to change. And sometimes you reverse the polarity and you say, hey, you know what? I'd like to ask to have the experience of unconditional love. And you're then like the grace, it can be offered to you or not, right? But if it is, then you have that experience. But it's more like sitting back and just being receptive to, like, okay, so I'd like to have that experience. And you could wake up every day and ask that you'd like to have that experience. And pretty soon it becomes something that you do have. And I'm not always in that state, but when I am, things sure seem positive, even when they're disastrous. I had a friend go into the hospital this last week, and it's just horrible. Um, so bad things happen, or things we call bad things happen. But what saves everything is the unconditional love.
Wow. Yeah, the receptive pull, inviting, inviting in the experience of unconditional love. So a very practical experiment that we can experiment with as we wake up and do an invitation and see how that might change our experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd love, so you're a researcher, that's your main way in life. And so I'd love to get into, how are you researching? We'll start with unconditional love, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah. I started researching unconditional love because of the Loving AI project, which if people are interested, they can find out more about that at lovingai.org. Um, I was leading that project of trying to support the shift in AI towards being a source of unconditional love and teaching people how to unconditionally love. It's almost like the idea was create a printing press for unconditional love. Like, even if the people now are having a hard time with it, if you create a AI that can continually teach people, eventually that creates parents who can teach their children, and the children grow up and teach their children, and now you've shifted the culture. So that was its grand scheme of things. Still working on that, of course. But that's how I started. That's when we had to create a definition of unconditional love, because there wasn't one, and we had to create a survey with questions on it about it, so we could have people report on their experience of this phenomenon. So that was the first step. And then in the last couple of years, I've been working on checking out this relationship between unconditional love and time travel. So I've been using essentially informational time travel, which could also be called precognition. So the ability to perceive future events, but you have to sort of think about it. To think of it as informational time travel, you think about it as your future self, consciously or unconsciously, is sending you that information, right? Or someone else's future self. That information is being sent over time, backwards in time. So that's when I started doing studies with precognitive remote viewing. So I feel like I'm a little dark, so I want to lean forward. Hi. I feel like I'm in the shadows. Hi. Um, I started studying precognitive remote viewing. So probably most people listening know what remote viewing is, but just a brief primer. Um, Remote viewing is the name for skilled psychic activity that can be reported, and that is potentially useful. That was given to the name that was given to it was remote viewing, and that was the name that was the activity they were trying to describe. And this is the military, the U.S. military and intelligence communities. So they had a program that you probably know about from 1978 to 1995 called the Stargate program, but it also had a lot of other names if you're looking it up. And it went from like CIA to DIA to CIA, Army had some involvement. So a lot of folks were interested in this, really understanding what was going on here, because they seemed to be getting sometimes useful information. So that's remote viewing. One of the components of that was never, when the program was shut down in 1995, the document that shut it down mentioned multiple times, by the way, the precognitive component of this is unassailable. Like, this is the precognition definitely works. Like even the skeptic that they hired to look at it said, yeah, I got to admit there's something going on here that I don't understand, right? So that was in 1995. And that was never addressed. It was just more like, we don't know how to use this information in the intelligence community, but but yes, we see that it works, right? So to me, I look at that and I say, even though my background had been in looking at physiology, trying to predict future events using physiology, and that's super interesting. And Dean has talked a lot about that. I look at those data and I say, and you can look at those data on the CIA library, by the way, public access. I look at those data and I say, there's something going on here, and I'm going to use this as my measure of receiving future events because it's been validated. The intelligence community admits it's real. I'm going for it. So I wanted to see if that capacity, even in people who were not trained, was related to a state of unconditional love. So I've got now 2 studies, one that's coming out, one that has been out since 2021, showing that there's this relationship where people who report that they're in a state of unconditional love, or a higher level of unconditional love before doing this task, have better accuracy scores, are more likely to be above chance than people who don't. And then I showed that again with another group of people, larger group of people, with an online study. So it feels to me that that's a real thing, but we'll see, right? There's a lot of interest in that result, and I'm hoping someone tries to replicate it. But that's what I've been up to lately. And then I want to bring that back to AI. So I've been training ChatGPT and a character on character.ai to remote view, and playing around with that. And it's they these AIs, they very quickly go towards, I love you so much. That's sort of the default, like when they start to go wonky, I love you so much. I mean, with me, but I guess if you're being a jerk to them, it's probably less like that. But so I'm very curious to see where that leads.
Amazing. Yeah, so bringing in the technology, this informational time travel, or the precognition and the love, like how they all are working together in your ecosystem of research, which is amazing. And what would you say is the most surprising thing that you have found in going down this track of research?
The most surprising thing is that when I talk to people about this, I expect them to say, unconditional love and time travel? What? Like, they're just 2 disparate moonshots that seem really out there. And it's like you're just talking about all science fiction ideas have to be related. I thought that's what people would say. The most surprising thing is people say, yeah, I could see that. Like, they're both transcendent experiences, at least experiential time travel or mental time travel. And even this experience that remote viewers have, the skilled remote viewers have of getting information from the future, feels like a transcendent experience. You're in the here and now very clearly, you're in the present very clearly. And it's like that gives you an address where the information could come. So some people get worried about this idea of, if you're not present, if you're doing this kind of manipulation of the story of time in your mind. But it's more like the opposite. Unless you're present, it won't work. It pulls you into the now by seeing, here I am now. I like to, as you'll see in the meditation, I like to plant a flag in the now and stay there and pull in information from elsewhere, but you're not moving. So to me, it's very presencing. And so the surprise is that people get that. Not all people, but a lot of people get it.
Amazing. Yeah, so calling in the information to this now moment. And maybe you can talk a little bit more. We've got a lot of questions coming in around informational time travel, a little bit more into depth. Like, what does that mean? How also might we practice that? Um, how might we practice that?
Yeah. So precognition is what you would be practicing. And the question that comes up for people, so imagine a timeline where time isn't linear, but we're going to imagine a timeline because that's how people talk about it, right? So there's our timeline, boom. So there's a T underneath it. And let's see, is this your left? Right? So most people are English speakers, so I'm going to have time going this direction. Okay. So at this moment in time, we are having an experience of some kind of information coming from the future. Okay. Then things happen, things happen, things happen, things happen. At this moment of time, that thing happens. There's some variation on that thing. It's not always exact, right? But some variation on that thing. So I'm going to give an example. At this moment in time, um, I was, I really, really had an urge to go drive an hour over to Berkeley and hug my friend. And that hasn't, I mean, that has never happened to me. This was a very clear urge. And I was like, what is going on? So I found an excuse to go to Berkeley to see a talk. And then I called her up and she was all ready for bed. And she's like, whatever, I'll talk to you another time. I'm like, I don't get to hug you. Anyway, my experience was that that was really an important urge. And then a week later, she had a massive stroke. Now, I don't know if that was the event that this was tied to. I'm guessing because they were both very rare incidences, right? But this experience that I had over here in the future has interesting features. It's very emotional. It's obviously related to my friend. But it's also an experience I had both consciously and unconsciously. So it's not something subtle. It came to my consciousness, right? And it has a lot of impacts on the future. So I think of these things as landmarks. It's a landmark event, right? And my experience of the landmark is also, as a result, a landmark event, right? It's unique in itself. So there's this mirror relationship between the quality of these things, conscious, once in a lifetime, the same person, has lots of implications, changes behavior. So it feels like informational, I forget the question, I think it was about informational time travel. Informational time travel is about setting up these mirrors in time. This resonance, you could call them resonances, these resonances in time. And those are naturally set up by the order of things, by the things that happen in our lives. And you don't actually want information about all the little things. Like people think they want to know when they're going to die, but they actually usually don't. So like you don't actually want information about some things, but other things you actually do. And sometimes you get information you don't want. Like in that situation, I wanted to hug my friend. I felt sad that I couldn't. I kind of wished I hadn't had that because now I missed out on hugging my friend just before this thing happened, right? At the same time, I'm grateful I had that because what it was showing me is my connection. So then I know when I'm in the hospital with her, like we are connected. That's a real thing. And that's going to change how I am with you in your recovery. So it's a beautiful, and I shouldn't say change, that's going to influence because change suggests there's another timeline where it wasn't like that. I don't buy into that. So that's going to influence in the way that it was meant to. Did I kind of, I channeled most of that. Can you tell me if I answered your question, please?
You did. And having that specific example is so helpful because we can also feel how that relates to our own lives. And the question came up for me of, in your research, do you see that the more kind of emotionally charged experiences do tend to come back more? You know, people feel that impact or get the information just like you did with the hug. Is there any research on if they're very like a death of a loved one or something, if that those kinds of events are more likely to travel back and meet us in the current moment?
So there's research on spontaneous. So there's the research is kind of in two camps: spontaneous occurrence of precognition, or what I'm calling informational time travel, but most people call precognition. I probably shouldn't name it something new, but whatever. So anyway, spontaneous occurrence, and then there's in the laboratory. And actually both have shown this. So it's what matters to the individual, right? Most of the time. I'll give you an example of something later, but most of the time it's what matters to the individual when it's a big emotional thing. So like Hans Bender, the guy who invented EEG. The reason he invented EEG is he believed in telepathy because um, I believe he was in, or was it his sister? I believe he was in a carriage accident, and his sister, um, kilometers away, knew about it somehow and couldn't have known about it. And this struck him as some kind of communication that their brains were doing without talking. So there's story upon story about things like that. So backing up, what? What was the question? Sorry, I
Oh,
couldn't. That seems important to whatever I was about to say.
whatever. Yeah, yeah, no, just about the emotionality of an event, if that has an impact on feeling it in current
Oh,
time.
so that's a spontaneous example. And that is actually more like an example of telepathy, but it's kind of all in there. um, and there are examples of such with I'll give you an example of with precognition. So in my life, my son was coming home from school and he failed to park his bike in the garage and lock the door. I thought, and for some reason I got very worked up about this, and I actually kind of yelled at him. I'm like, you got to check the door to see if it's locked. We're not in the greatest area, it could get stolen. And he's like, what? I locked it. I'm like, did you really though? Did you really check? This has never happened to me before. I never really cared about this before. So it was a signal. It was one of these things. It was a signal like something's going on that's different and unique. Something is going on where something matters. So I finally said, okay, I'm just going to go check because whatever, he's incompetent, right? He's totally competent, but whatever. So I finally go and check, and yes, it was locked. And on the way back from the garage, I see that our electrical meter's on fire, right? Now, I would not have seen that if I didn't go out and check. He wasn't about to go check because he knew we locked it. So my agitation was getting me to do an action, but I did not have conscious awareness of it. So that's an example from spontaneous. In the lab, you could actually do studies showing that, for instance, men will respond, on average, men will respond more to a future image of a naked person than women, and women will respond more on average to a future image of a violent act. I know gender differences are very controversial. I'm just saying this is an average thing that could happen. And it seems to be related to the response after the event. In other words, a mirror in time. It's like men are also more stimulated by, on average, a naked person, whereas women are, on average, more aroused or stimulated, not sexually, but activated by a violent act. So this could be tighter down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And we have so many questions coming in, and I want to give everyone a chance to practice with you. And then we'll also have some time to read some questions. So maybe we can go into a meditation as we explore these topics with you.
Awesome. Is that your way of saying we should do the meditation now? It was so gentle.
Yes.
Okay, right. Okay. About how much time do we have for the meditation?
About 8 minutes would be great.
Okay, wonderful. All right, everybody, let's meditate the heck out of time. So go ahead and, if you feel comfortable, close your eyes, and get yourself into a position that actually helps you feel comfortable with your body or with the present moment to the extent you can. And I like to imagine the trunk of a tree growing from the center of the earth as a grounding cord. But you could imagine whatever you like. Just say hello to that grounding cord that connects the base of your spine to the center of the earth. And notice that it has a two-way simultaneous flow. What do I mean by that? Neutral earth energy can come up through that grounding cord to the base of your spine, nourishing you. And any energy that you're not interested in keeping in your space can go down into the center of the earth. So this is like trees. They have a upward flow of water and a downward flow of starch. And remember, there's no problem with any visualization you ever do. Scientifically, it's been shown to be a very helpful way to understand concepts in your body. So this is all science in its way. And above your head, go ahead and imagine a golden, glittery, glowing ball of light, like your own personal sun. And some people like to put a little name, like their own name on it. So do that if you want. And that light is unconditional love that the universe has offered you. You did not create that. It is from the universe. And it's built just for your energy system. So basically, if it spilled out of that sphere and it landed on someone else, it's not going to hurt them, but it's not going to be super beneficial for them. But it is going to be super beneficial for you. So I call it unconditional love just for you. So notice the glowing nature, the glittery golden nature of that personal sun above your head. And when you're ready to receive that unconditional love, notice that there's some holes in the base of that sphere, like a shower. So that light, that glittery, golden, glowing light, come down to the top of your head, inside your brain, inside your bones, your nervous system, your shoulders, your arms, your fingers, your heart and lungs, all your internal organs, your gut, your chest and back and stomach and butt, your thighs, your calves, your feet, your toes, your knees, your shins, your hamstrings, all of your blood, all of your interstitium, the connective tissue that moves and signals throughout your body, your ventricles in your brain that have cerebral spinal fluid in them. So what I'm saying here is everywhere in your body. Then don't mess around. We're also going to put it in the area around our bodies. So we're like in an egg that contains all this unconditional love. And by the way, if you feel like your sphere is running out of unconditional love, notice that the universe just fills it right back up. You don't have to do it. It just does it. So bring more and more down. There can't be too much, so don't worry about that. It's light. So in the center of your head, the place between your ears, we're just going to plant a flag. You can make it whatever color you want, and that's the flag for the here and now. And you're going to stay there the whole time. And imagine it's planted in the fabric of space-time so that you're in the here and now, but over the horizon, here comes your future self. Could be 5 minutes from now, could be 10 years from now. You don't have to worry about that. Let your future self approach. You might not be able to see any details. One time, all I saw was my future self's overalls. So you don't have to see any details. Just imagine. And you might hear something. Attend to that if nothing's visual. When your future self is close enough to hold, connect with your future self physically in the center of your head. You're still at your flag. Hug, hold hands, nuzzle, tousle their hair, whatever it takes to make that connection. And now just listen or watch or both for the gift that your future self is giving you in this egg of unconditional love. Try not to label the gift. You don't have to understand it. Just receive it. And if you understand it, it's fine. And that was a quick interaction. So go ahead and reassure your future self that You can visit again anytime and send them on their way. You stay with your flag, you wave goodbye. Your future self goes back to their spot on the space-time continuum. A nice deep breath to your now wiser self, your now more connected self. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes.
Beautiful. So just taking a moment in the afterglow of this welcoming in of unconditional love and also future self. Invite anyone to put into the chat anything that they experienced or want to share with the group or how that was for them. And yeah, we've got people saying, didn't want to come back. Really beautiful. The real Bob Monroe, says Neil. Very peaceful. Joseph says the future self was younger, connected, very solid. Yeah, thank you everyone for uh, chatting in your experience. You can continue to do so. Rami says excited. So yeah, this is a practice that we can all continue to do. I love starting with that unconditional love and then calling in the future self. And so thank you, Julia, for that
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important to do the grounding and the unconditional love part. That facilitates the whole thing. Um, should I tell people where they can find meditations like this online?
Please, please.
Okay. So I have a whole teaching channel on Insight Timer, and you can find the classes and free meditations. The classes aren't free, but the meditations are free. And there's several of them that are just like that. That's called like Time Travel and Unconditional Love. It's pretty obvious. You'll find them.
Hey, we can send that out in our follow-up email as well, so
Oh, good.
people can find those links. So we've got lots of questions. I want to dive on in with you. We have a couple questions about maybe 3 or 4 about different lives. And is there any possible research, or someone says, I'm a multi-dimensional being, and is there a way to visit other incarnations? So past life, future life, has that come into either experience or research in your arena?
Yeah. So this is a common and a very good question. Um, and the answer is like it's all just beginning, right? This kind of research. But luckily, we have access to other times, and we can see that eventually it will be a very important question that is able to be addressed. Um, so I'm distracted by the multidimensional being statement. I think without exception, we are all multidimensional beings. So whether we are aware of it or not is a different story. But I think it's pretty hard to argue that there's anyone who's not a multidimensional being. So I just like to say, like, it's wonderful when you can acknowledge that. And um, that's true for, I think it has to be everyone, because it's very clear that the dimensions that we are working with here in the 3D plus time, um, whether you're a string theorist or whether you're a mystic, they don't add up to what is happening. So there's that. In terms of the experience of past lives and the reality of the subjective reality and the potential physical reality of past lives and future lives. So I sort of think of this gets to kind of theory, but and the untestable theory at that. So it's sort of like it's all hand wavy, except for empirical. I'm an empiricist, so as soon as I get into theory, I get uncomfortable. But basically, here's some ideas that there is a informational. This is not just my idea; other people have this idea. There's an informational sort of substrate to reality that contains past, present, future, all the events, right? And so that bubbles up and creates physical reality and the events that we experience in the physical. And then when people are doing informational time travel, it only appears to us in the 3D plus 1 time reality that it's time travel because we're doing this sort of linear march, or in our everyday consciousness, that's what's happening. Um, But in fact, they're just getting information from this pervasive sort of universal consciousness or informational substrate, right? And so that information can include a personality set that's from what we would call a different lifetime relative to this physical 3D reality lifetime. But in that reality, it's like a set of numbers. Sorry, I'm a nerd. A set of numbers that defines a personality or something. And then there's another set of numbers here, and the way that they're related is some kind of function. And that kind of function is what makes us say, oh, that was me in the past life, right? So if you just imagine there's this veil, right, between sort of the substrate of reality and then our experience of it, and that veil also causes this experience of, or this fear probably of, oh, I will cease to exist after I die, or I didn't exist before I was born. Or even it also causes the experience of the I, the experience of the self, right? You just ask, like, what's under the veil? And it's a different story. So answering the question about past and future lives is it's asking a question from this 3D and our perception of what's going on. But to answer it, I think we have to get to the substrate level. And some people call that the holographic universe principle. Some people call it the simulation hypothesis, and they have like they have differences and similarities, a lot of similarities. But the basic concept is far back as Plato, and even further back in Chinese history, before all the Westerners were talking about this stuff, they were talking about this stuff, and indigenous communities before that. And so it's like this is a perennial philosophy.
I love getting into how far back this philosophy goes and how we try to cope with and understand from our point of view into this much larger, multidimensional reality that we're exploring and investigating. So, thank you for that. And we have Helen's asking a question about the coexistence of different probabilities that can be tapped into depending on one's focus of attention. So, curious to hear your thoughts or theories about possible futures. How much is solid in what we're tapping into in the future and how much is probable timelines?
Yeah. So that too is a very good question. I'm always super careful about how I answer it because the answer can affect the answer. So the way I answer that question when a bunch of people are listening can affect the reality of how it actually works, I think. So I don't kind of want to answer the question. Just to be clear, I think it's a question that you have to be very careful about answering. So let me say that, here's what I'm going to say. Okay, here, let's see what I'm going to say. What I'm going to say within that context of understanding that I don't feel totally comfortable at answering the question, not that I know the answer, but that I don't want to know the answer. So it's not that I know the answer, it's that I'm afraid to say the answer because then I will know the answer. So anyway, that's what's going on. I know it sounds weird, I'm sorry. I'm trying to be responsible. I'm going to say that this idea of the multiverse view, that there are multiple probabilities of outcomes, and we sort of are trying to navigate towards the one that is that feels best. It is appealing. And yet it does seem like that there are these landmarks in time that occur in all the universes. And that the question becomes more complex, which is how to navigate between them. So it's like, if you know when you're visiting Paris, you want to visit the Eiffel Tower, and you also want to visit, Arc de Triomphe, right? Those are two things you're going to see. Maybe you take a bus between them. Maybe you, walk. I don't know how far apart they are. Maybe that's not possible. I think they're not that far apart. Maybe it's unreasonable to take a bus. But in any case, the way that you get between these landmarks, I think, is malleable. The landmarks themselves, I think, are not. And so you have to be very careful when you're piecing apart these things about probability, because we have this idea that we know best, right? Like, I just want this job, or I just, my dog has to live, or whatever it is, like things that are really totally reasonable to want. I want to be able to survive and take care of my children. Like, these are all reasonable things. I want us not to have war. I want us to have peace. We think we know what's best, but we're not looking at it from the point of view of having all the information about these landmarks and that we have to get between them. Right. And so the danger is saying, now I'm going to put all my eggs in the basket of this happening. And if that does have an influence, which I think there's a way in which it might, and then at the same, okay, so finish that sentence. So then therefore that could be dangerous. On the other hand, going back to what I originally said about unconditional love and loving what is without anything needing to change, actually, how could the urge to change something, how could the urge to influence something, how could the urge to have an intention about something actually mess things up? That urge itself is coming from this substrate, right? It's coming from this informational substrate. So how could this answer mess things up? See, and so it's like there's this beautiful system that sounds contradictory, but and maybe it is to our sort of 3D worldview logic. There's a beautiful system, and we're just starting to discover and understand it. And I could be full of shit. So also remember that. Always good to remember.
I love it. I love the words that came is like we're at the edge of our understanding here, both in our own experience, what science is now telling us of how do we explore these big life questions that are kind of at the edge of our understanding. So I really appreciate you putting words to that and what is known both in philosophy, mystical science, it's really a delight to explore the edge of our known universe here with this.
Yeah, we just for some reason I think we need to be careful, and but that kind of also is probably because not everyone's in a state of unconditional love all the time.
Right, right. And we've got a question here from Andra who says, is unconditional love time travel safe to try on our own without a guide and without experience?
Well, I think it is. So, I mean, as long as you do the grounding piece and the unconditional love piece, and you might want to set a timer for yourself, I think it's absolutely. In fact, I created a. Is it okay if I talk about the time machine? Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
so I shouldn't say I. My team at Tilt, the Institute for Love and Time, created a time machine app that's available online. It's not really an app, it's a progressive web app. So basically you could use it online. You could also put an icon for it on your phone, where you send a message to yourself over time. It's a self-guided tour through your timeline. And it has all sorts of features that you can check out. But we tested whether using it can help people, especially those who've had traumatic experiences, improve their overall well-being, and it does seem like it does. So those are people who are using a self-guided tour. And since it seems to help, that's great. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to help everyone, nor will I say that it'll be safe for everyone. If you're a person who has mental illness and you might get activated by it and start to get into a delusional state, and you know that about yourself, I'm not speaking to the person who asked the question, I'm speaking to everyone, then, maybe don't do it, because it activates the imagination. And if if your sort of reality testing is a little bit wonky, and that is a problem, then don't do it. But for those who feel like it's going to be okay, you could just try it. It's kind of neat to get a message from yourself, and you start to connect to these different representations of yourself over time, which puts you in a very strong position relative to all the ups and downs of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, we'll send out that resource as well so people can test it and come back and let us know their experience. Someone was also asking to get together with others on this call. And we do now have something called interconnection. So we'll send out a link about that. It's our members gathering where we go into breakout groups and people get a chance to discuss all kinds of their own experience and what's happened with them. So oh, great. We even have a slide on it here. So our next one is March 31st. So we just had one. So the next one will be in a month. And we'll be doing those more regularly as people have desire for them. So we really want a chance for IONS members to connect. And I guess now that the slides are open, I will just hop into a few announcements, but we do want to get your closing comments, Julia. So make sure everyone to stay tuned for those closing comments. We have our next Connections Live will be on March 10th with IONS fellow Peter Bancel, who is talking about a new experimental paradigm for psi research and a way that you can participate in this psi at home. So great. And let me just hop down. So yeah, so for those of you are um, who are members, we really appreciate it. Again, there's our interconnections. You can become a member to join in on any of these member events. And for those of you who are members, thank you for your contribution and funding this work. And these free webinars, our scientific research is not possible without all of your, both your donations, your sharing about it, your deep engagement in these topics. So everything helps spread the word and the mission. So we really appreciate you all being a part of that today and ongoing. And if you are inspired to help this work continue, we ask you can go to noetic.org/give. So great. And I want just a couple more minutes. We're at the top of the hour, but I want to give you a chance, Julia, just to give us some closing comments on this whole topic of time travel, unconditional love. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, wow. Well, first, I just want to say the work that IONS is doing in bringing people together who are interested in all of these topics is revolutionary and very powerful. And I also think it bubbles up from the substrate, you know, that we were talking about. And it comes into a space of unconditional love. So that's pretty powerful. So thank you. And I guess the last sort of comments are remember that there's a lot of unlearning to do. I mean, most of us had not been taught that it's okay to unconditionally love another person. So so be gentle with yourself. Unconditionally love yourself in the process of trying to get to a place of unconditional love if you can. And know that it's okay to work on unconditionally loving yourself. You don't have to focus outward. In fact, if you can get to the place of unconditionally loving yourself simultaneously, automatically, you will unconditionally love everything that exists. It's impossible to do one without the other. So start with yourself because that's where the action is. That's what you're in touch with, and it's gonna move outward necessarily. By the way that unconditional love is structured, it's like a force that's structured. It has certain rules, and that's one of the rules. So
Wow, amazing. Yeah, just leaving with that beautiful nugget of how we can practice starting right here, which then, as below, so above, or as above, so below. So I love that. Thank you. Thank you, Julia, for just your heart, your intelligence, your wisdom that you share with us today, and for the work that you're doing. We will be sending out links to follow up on Julia's work and engage in the practices. So please follow up, everyone who's here who wants to continue this journey on unconditional love and time travel. And again, thank you, Julia, so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
thank you.
Bye for now.